automate several tasks. Or if you just want to code something so you don't have to open ArcGIS, you can just operate on some data. So something that you could do would be create a Python script that would download maybe some land cover data online using an FTP or off an FTP from, say, the St. John's Water Management District, and then you can save that to your computer. You can send that path through Python, do an ArcGIS script that maybe clips it to, say, the Orange County boundary, and you can process and maybe compute statistics to see, well, how much percentage is water, how much is urban area, and you can do all that processing and spit it out to a nice text file using Python without even having to load in ArcGIS. So I'm going to go into just some general programming basics first that are somewhat specific to Python, but they're pretty general for any programming language. So first of all, what's Python? Python is a fairly new programming language. I don't know exactly when it started, but it's still fairly new, and it's pretty easy to use. It has a very readable syntax, and it's open source, and you can download it for Windows, Mac, Linux, Solaris, or any type of, I don't know if it's on the Chrome operating system yet, but it's open source, and there's a lot of online forums or tutorials that help you try to solve the problem you're solving. So why Python and ArcGIS? Python interacts with ArcGIS, and like I said, it can be used to automate tasks and analysis. So you can call all those toolboxes from Python and give it the inputs you need, and then it'll shoot out the output. And like I said, it includes a large user community, and you can basically write scripts, which are several programs. Script or a program, it's kind of the same thing. A program may contain many scripts that you call within a single program, and we'll get into that a bit later. So first, let's just all make sure that we are able to load, we'll call it the IDLE, the idle. It's kind of the Python window, so we go to all programs, and then ArcGIS, Python 2.7. So if you don't have that, stand up and scream real loud. You don't have to open it yet, but everyone's good? That is important. Alright, so if you go and get ArcGIS and install it on your home computer, you should get this automatically installed. It should come with the latest version of ArcGIS. So let's go over some programming basics. Stop me if you have questions. I want to make this an interactive talk. So first we have variables. Obviously we're working with data, so maybe we have XY data, we have some elevation data, maybe we have strings that contain file names, strings that contain the spatial reference, so NAT83 like we went over before. So that contains all the information in a variable for our program. And then we want to operate on that variable, so we can put those variables through control structures, such as if statements or loops. And we'll get into that. And then also we can organize our code into smaller bits, and we'll call those functions. So maybe you have a function called add, and you send it two variables, maybe two integer variables, x and y, and they add them together, and then it returns, we'll call it C, so it returns the addition of those two. And an important thing to note is Python is case sensitive, and it also reads white space for defining programming blocks, and we'll see what a programming block is when we get into the control structure. So when you're following along with what I'm doing on the screen, if I capitalize something, make sure you capitalize it, just so we're on the same page, or else you might run into issues later. So first, let's look at the variable string, how to print a string. So, and another thing is a comment line. So we can have, does anyone know what a comment line is in programming? So it's basically a line that's not read when you execute the code. So it's kind of like notes. Think of the comment as a notes. And so it's preceded by the $, or the number sign. And so everything after this number sign is read as a comment. The code will not read it, so it's just notice that you can put to your program. So let's go ahead and launch and register the program. So we'll go launch the IDLE. So if you don't have that loaded, we'll see if I can do this. So there's two things to keep in mind here. So we have this Python shell, which is kind of like we can type commands right inside the shell. So we can type print hello world. Yeah. string, we put it in quotation marks, which is different than if we were to have a program. So if we go to File, let's do, okay. So let's go in the folder ArcGIS Workshop, and let's create an actual program. So we're not going to, so in the Python shell we can do line by line coding. But what if we wanted to write a program that contained 10 lines and run it all at once? And we would need an external file to do that. So if we're in this ArcGIS Workshop, so we can right click, and then new, and then do text document. And then let's name this first, or my program, .py, py Python. And then if we go to File, Open, let's open that file. We might have to click all files to see it. And click Open. So it should be blank. Everyone with me?
Could you please show it again?
Yeah, so we created a right click, new, text document,
Yes.
and then we just named it my program.
Yeah.
And then in the Python shell that we loaded, which is the IDLE, File Open,
Okay.
and let's just open that. You might have to click on the file name, you might have to select all files to see it. So first, let's just go ahead and resave this so it knows that it's a Python file. So file save as, and my program.py. I think the other one is still recognizing it as .py.txt. So if we save that, oh, okay. No, I don't want to. And why does that? Let's save it as another name.
One of them means I deleted that .py, and then it saved it as
Oh,
.py.
okay.
Like if you already have the extension typed in, it tries to save it as a text.
Yeah, I tried to change that, but I guess the user setting is on this one. Let me do that. Alright, so delete the .py, sorry guys. Open, and then open it.
Well, I was doing that when I was saving as. I just sort of renamed it, and then ended up with a separate file.
I hate Windows default settings. Alright, so when you save it, just, yeah, like you said, save it as my program and then add .py name. Okay, so then if you go in your window, it should have the Python logo on it. So you can delete the other one. Is everyone on the same page as I am?
No, let me give it a minute.
Are we good? No. Alright, you want me to do that again?
I think not. I think I think it is so like mine's in the right format, but it's not recognizing Python as the program. Like you got the logo to actually update to
When
Python
I
logo.
saved it as, I added the .py here.
Oh, I thought since I had it saved type as and then py's in there.
I had it there too, and it was .py.txt for some reason.
There we go.
Does everyone have this window open at least?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have this window open, you can just name it whatever you want. So just save it as a different name. Sorry, it's complicated first. It's the computer. Are we good now? Anyone have an issue? Paige, you good? Martin, you good?
automatically do it.
Where's that?
I thought it would open a new Python shell, not.
Okay. Sounds like that.
Any other questions so far? Once you get your computer set up with doing this, it's a lot easier when you go back the second time. Wait, am I good?
What?
See you.
You can get that. Like I said, I think mine's, I mean, I think I can keep going, but mine's just saving it as like a file, and it doesn't recognize what to open it as. But it's still like, it's giving me this window, so I'm fine.
Yeah, just go here in the Python shell and do file new.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. But it's still, for whatever reason, wherever I save that, it's just coming up as like an unknown file. Type. You know, like before
maybe no
I
one's opened a Python file on your computer.
What?
Maybe no one's opened a Python file on the computer.
I did it like you did.
Yeah.
I put .py in the file name and it recognized it.
Did you save it as a .py and then you saved it?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
Oh.
File save as had .py.
There we go. Oh, okay. But this, like, I mean, it opens.
Maintenance.
It's weird. Yeah, up there.
Yeah.
So do you think like put the documents in, or put everything in documents because it's like directories and it needs to be kind of the same?
I think that's in my document.
Yeah, I would put all the files in the documents and then
Are we good? Stephanie, are you good?
Yeah, I'll hit that.
Okay. Alright, so now what we can do, if you go back to the Python, the shell, where I type print hello world, you can also do some expression. So c equals 2 equals 4, and we can print c, which should give us 6. We can do that the same kind of stuff in our .py, our program. So let's go ahead and do, let's say, to make a comment. It's good when you're coding to add comments throughout your code, so when you come back to it months, weeks, years later, you remember, why did you add this here, or why did I format my code this way. So you set a variable name. What's your name? And then you can print name. So save it. You Control S or file save. And then you can run at the top. You can run the Python shell. Run module. It'll run the module you have open. Or F5. So it should print your name. Everyone got that? You just wrote your first program. Congratulations. So, let's go back to this. Alright. So we can also have, as you guessed, numeric types. So this kind of goes with what Stephanie was talking about earlier when she added the X and Y column and she selected, I think, float. So there are integers and floats. Integers are, as they say, integers. Floats can have decimals. So there also could be doubles. It just depends on the amount of decimals you have. So we can declare integer X or float X. And so let's do that in our program. Or on the command, either way. So let's just set X equals 10. And we can print X, 10. Y equals 3.14, print Y. And so what Python does is, some programming languages you have to basically initialize your variables. So you have to say from the beginning of the program, x is going to be integer, y is going to be double. But Python reads it on the fly. If it's given an integer, it's going to be an integer. So if it's given decimal, it's going to be a float, not an integer. Does that make sense? So you don't have to tell the program at the beginning that x can only be an integer. And then through the whole thing, it's going to be an integer. And if you try to assign it a double, you may get an error. But with Python, it'll recognize it on the fly. So that's one of the things about the syntax. Syntax is basically the language of the code, that it's going to be a double if you assign it as a double. If you give it a string, the variable is not a double because it's containing a string, which is characters. Does that make sense? No, maybe? Alright. So one thing we can do is we can what's called casting strings. So let's make a variable so you have your name and here. So now we have name, whatever your name is. And so let's print. And then, okay, we assigned y is 3.14. So we can say print name. I think it's comma. And then we can say str y. So we're going to print the double y, which is set to 3.14, but we're going to print it as a string. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like inversion. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Which I guess you could also, it seems like they want, they have here float. Whoops. Oh, never mind. Sorry, that's the variable called float x. Okay, we did it right.
What is a float again?
Never mind. I just named here float x instead of y. I just had a different variable name.
And then an integer.
So, like here, alright, so if we do this, so let's say C equals str y. If I print C, and if I print y, they look the same, right? But C is not, so if I try to add, let's say a equals 5. So a is an integer of equal to 5. Y is a double of 3.14, so if I can print a plus y, I'll get a result, right? 8.14. But if I try to print a to C, C is a string. It won't work. Even though it contains a number, it's a character. Now you guys see the difference between these data types?
Yeah.
Alright. So here's the if statement. This is probably one of the most powerful tools other than the next section we'll talk about with loops that your program will need. So if statements is basically if something is true, then execute a command. If something else is true, execute this command, or if everything else fails, then print the final command. So for this case, we set x equal to 2. Then we say is x, we'll use equals to see if it's true. So does x equal 1? If it did, then we would say x is 1. But it doesn't, so we go down to the next block. Elif stands for else if. So x does equal 2. So here it'll say print x is 2. So if x was equal to 4, then it would print x is not known. So let's change our first program. And let's say angle equals 45.0. So if angle is less than 45, and then we do our colon. So here's our first programming block. Colon means the end of the if. And then you see it automatically indents. And the indentation is 4 spaces. So if you're using another text editor for programming in Python rather than this window, then you want to make sure that it's 4 spaces. And it's not a tab, it's 4 spaces. So what do we want to say here? Print angle is that right at Q? you know you did something wrong. So I didn't. So if you notice, I didn't include the colon at the end, so it went back to the left. So if you want to make sure you know where you want to be, and then have your spaces. Print, angle. I'm going to change my original angle to 90, because I forgot the 7th grade geometry rules.
Matt, can I do this? So if you didn't delete, so when you go from if to elif, if you don't delete yourself back, does that kind of mess it up? Like if you have
It may,
tab,
yeah.
it should be.
I think it will mess it up.
Yeah, so it reads that space in some way, and that kind of throws it off.
Yeah.
Just,
And I'll show you why in a second.
alright.
Actually, since you asked. Okay, so we can save this now. Then we'll go to run module. So we should get our answer.
Nice.
Congratulations, you wrote your second program.
Success.
Everyone good so far? No?
Yep.
Okay, good. Alright, so what happens if I put -5.0? When we run it, obviously we know the answer. We'll get an acute angle. But what if we wanted to convert this to a positive degree? So it would be 355. So we can do this and say if angle is less than 0, then let's add angle equals angle plus 360. So now let's just do a little bit more. Let's say print what angle is, space. Then we'll add a comma and we'll say str angle. So let's convert our angle to a positive direction. And then we'll say, okay, we're going to try and check this angle, and then it'll print out. So let's see if that works. Alright, so we got 355, and then set it with those. So now we can do a nested if statement, which means an if statement inside of an if statement. So after our first if, let's check something else. What can we check? Let's say if angle. What can we check here? Angle is greater than, let's say 30. Let's say for some reason we want to change our angle. We can say angle is and run that. Anyone see any issue here? So it's because our angle is 355, it won't even go into this code block. So it immediately skips down to here because it's greater than 90 and prints this. So let's change our angle to be 35. And then now we see that our angle is greater than 30. Can everyone see this? So now let's change it to be 25. So now it'll execute this statement, but because it's not greater than 30, it won't execute this print statement. Alright, so everyone got kind of this coding block of if statements, nested if statements. So how is this useful when we're using ArcGIS? So maybe you have, let's see. So maybe you want to create a point shapefile from some external data, and you want each point shapefile to contain 10 points. But you have a text file that contains 35 points. So you can have an if statement that says if the point number you're at through a loop, we'll get to loops in a second, but we'll be at point 11. we want to take those first 10 and store them in its own shapefile. Then we'll read the next 10 and check, okay, have we reached 10 more? Then save that to another shapefile. So that could be an instance where you want to have an if statement. Any questions?
So like for the first major if statement, you have if, else, else if, and then else. But for the smaller ones, you don't necessarily have an else statement. Python doesn't require you to have.
Right. You don't have to have an else. You can just have an if. Though it's usually it's good to have an else just in case something happens, so you don't get some runtime bug. Alright, so now let's go to loops. So here's what I was talking about with my example. So there's two types of loops. There's for loops and then there's while loops. So here's an example of a for loop. So we want to perform some iteration on something. So for this case, we have some integer which we define as I in range 3. So we're going to loop through this time, loop through this 3 times, or maybe I think 4. And so we have our code block. So we want to indent our 4 spaces, and then we'll just print I. And so Python, this is important to note, Python uses array indexes that start at 0, not 1. So I'll show you that here. So we can delete this. So let's type what I have here for I in range 3. Print I. So I believe I should go from 0 to 3. Or 0 to 2, I mean, 3 times. So I is first 0, then 1, then 2 for 3 iterations. So it's important to remember that this is the number of iterations, not to the number you want to go to. Starting at 0. Make sense? So if we were looking to load in a file that had 30 points, we would want to loop through, say, 30 times. So we want to grab the first point, see, is this point exceeded the number of points that is our threshold, so 10. So let's do that. We can do an example here. So let's say num points equals 0. So let's make our range 9. So let's say num points equals num points plus 1. And then if num points is less than 0, or less than 10, then print store points. Elif, or we can just do else if you want. So else means that it's got to be greater than 10. Then let's reset num points back to 0. So let's change this to